But first, to the story of the week, and one that raises questions about the government's commitment to transparency and truthfulness.
Designed by Hawke, refined by Keating. Tonight, superannuation is being defined by Jim Chalmers.
The objective of superannuation is to preserve savings and deliver income for a dignified retirement alongside government support in an equitable and sustainable way.
So what does that mean? Have a listen to Steve Price on the project.
I suspect this is a lot less about early access to your super than about the tax concessions super has. And Jim Chalmers is going to just soften us up and the government's going to come after some of those tax concessions.
I think you're 100% right.
But what was Jim Chalmers and co saying about superannuation when they were in opposition?
We have no intention of making any super changes.
Australians shouldn't expect major changes to superannuation.
Now, that undertaking was crystal clear, but that didn't stop Anthony Albanese and Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones from trying to wriggle out of it this week.
We said during the election campaign that we did not intend to make big changes to superannuation, and we don't.
Stephen Jones, on anybody's reading, what Jim Chalmers is talking about are major changes. Why weren't you more upfront with voters about this before the election?
We were.
But he also said before the election there wouldn't be major changes. How do you square that up with what he's talking about on Monday and what you say you talked about before the election?
Yeah, look, I don't think they're... I think the comments that we've made before the election, the indications we gave before the election, have to be viewed in the context of everything we said about superannuation.
This is a major shift from what we were told last year, and it goes right to the government's credibility. This is the occasion for journalists to skewer ministers for deceiving the public. But Seven's political editor, Mark Riley, couldn't have been more accommodating to the PM, even offering him a way out.
Why is it fair for low to middle income people, particularly women who have little to no superannuation, to see people on high incomes getting billions of dollars in super tax concessions at a time of an unprecedented cost of living crisis? And why, when the circumstances change, won't you change your mind and explain to the Australian people why you've done that?
And on ABC 7:30, it was the kid glove treatment of the PM. Watch how host Sarah Ferguson broaches the subject.
Where does the Prime Minister get his political cover from for such a touchy subject that is starting to make changes to superannuation?
The crucial question, I think, Sarah, is the question of equity. That is, that it's got to be a question of the superannuation tax concessions looking like they're fairly distributed. The government is clearly foreshadowing that they're going to have to do more to sort of make more equitable superannuation tax concessions.
And today, The Australian correctly pointed out that Labor's secret super plans were hypocritical, considering Albanese himself is set to benefit from one of the world's most generous parliamentary pension schemes, which could lead him to pocket up to $400,000 a year. And you know how our new Prime Minister responded to that story? He attacked the journalists who wrote it and the organisation which crunched the numbers.
Well, the Australian report is wrong. But don't believe everything you read in a paper that doesn't check. But the IPA that put out these figures, the IPA have an agenda.
Albanese could simply have been upfront and transparent with Australians about his pension if he disagreed with the maths, but he blatantly refused. So much for that new transparent government we were promised. Now let's bring in tonight's panel, and I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Nova's Michelle Stevenson and Sky News contributor Joe Hildebrand.
Hello, Jack.
Joe, let's start with you.
Yes.
Attacking the journalist, is that a good strategy?
I'm not sure if he was actually attacking the journalist. I think he was more attacking the IPA. And I think to the Aussies' credit, they did declare that the IPA was a right-wing
he said the report was
think
wrong.
tank. Well, of course, you're going to say the report's wrong if the report is hypercritical of you. Look, I think in a sense, we all know that politicians get ridiculously generous super pensions. I think you can sort of almost put that to one side. You can deal with that on its merits and say, is that fair? Probably not. But, you know, we've had debates about that before. The question is really about these new super proposals, whatever they may be, and they've sort of run it up the flagpole, but we don't know exactly what the flag looks like. And also and also what the government has said about it in the past, what Labor has said about it in the past. Now, it is very, very clear that one of the reasons Bill Shorten lost the 2019 election was because it was susceptible to a fear campaign about franking credits or a completely justified campaign about franking credits.
Well, either way, made some changes already.
Either way, that's right. Either way, that is clearly toxic, and the government and Labor rightly just completely jettisoned that from its policy platform and basically vowed never to, just never to speak of this again. We're never going to talk about it again. That was the strategy it took to the election campaign. If you listen to what they actually say, of course, there's always that great political caveat, which often occurs before a leadership change.
We have no intention.
We have no intention. That's right. Well, we didn't have any intention. Now we have an intention. Back then we didn't have any intention.
Always an out.
The public shouldn't expect any changes. That's right, because we're telling them not to expect any changes.
Very generous man.
But I think, look, they do. The policy itself is a good idea. Clearly, when you're paying more in super tax concessions than you are in the age pension, something is broken, something is very, very rotten. What you should do is have the courage to say, all right, we've changed our position, or circumstances have changed that have forced us to change our position, but we know we don't have a mandate for this, so we will take it to the next election, and you yourself can decide on whether you think this is fair. Like Howard did with the GST.
Well, but why is everyone so upset about this? I mean, I feel like politicians do this on the regular. They say one thing and then they do a complete opposite. I mean, we saw the Liberals, we saw Tony Abbott do it with climate. So I don't think we should be upset about that. I think what we should be upset is having these conversations where things potentially affect older generations who have more money than the younger generations. I mean, when I heard about this, I thought rich people problems, like who's got over $3 million in super? Can't tell you who, wouldn't know anyone. So for me to have this argument and for people to be so hard on Labor for trying to rein in some of those tax concessions, and let's be real, they need to be reined in, that I just think we need to have a conversation about what's going on instead of politicking, which is where we get into.
It's a fair point, but if you're looking at political capital and what you're bringing to the public, maybe this is one for you, Joe. Do you think that they do themselves more damage if they go with this small target strategy, but then there is this perception, whether fair or not, a perception in the media that they've misled voters, that they've been dishonest? They could have just made the arguments that both of you have made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why wouldn't they?
And that's exactly it. Michelle is right. This is like Jim Chalmers makes an excellent point.
Yeah.
The problem is he didn't make it before the election and people didn't vote for it. And the thing is, and as the point, why is it such a big deal? I guess I would say we need to restore some degree of honesty and some degree of trust in politics and political institutions, because if we don't, we will see things happen here that so far haven't happened, but they've happened in the US, they've happened in the UK, happened in France and Canada in kind of different ways, where you will see a collapse in the two-party system. We already have very nearly seen that at the last election, where the major parties pretty much got a third each, and then a third of voters.
More people voted for the coalition than Labor.
Voted for someone else. That's exactly right. And so, if people feel like both major parties are lying to them, and who uses that line? One Nation. Then you are going to have a crisis in our political institutions, and that will undo the stability that served this country very, very well. So I do think you have to be honest with the electorate. Labor roasted John Howard when he changed his mind on the GST, even though he actually had the courage to put it to an election. And so I think fair enough that Labor should be put under pressure now.
Look, it's a good point, and if Albanese had stood up today at the press conference and made the remarks that you two have made, I think that would be more understandable. I think it's a very questionable tactic to say that you can't trust the newspaper that's printing.
And Albanese has form here. I mean, we have seen him consistently kind of backtrack and not really kind of say anything. He's just always kind of like a bit kind of on both sides about everything. I mean, I do think they have good policies. I just think they're not really good at being forceful with
them. The merits of the policy aside, I guess it's how you go about it.